The text came through just after 2 in the morning, lighting up the screen in a dark, unfamiliar bedroom. I lost our child because of you. No greeting. No context. Just blame, raw and unfiltered. The message continued, each line heavier than the last. Lily Grace was gone. The doctors had used careful words. Stress, complications. But Naomi knew better. She had been carrying everything alone for months. The tension. The arguments. The nights she cried herself to sleep while Daniel turned his back and told her she was being dramatic. The times she begged him to slow down, to listen, to care. This wasn't an accident. It was the cost of being ignored. The final line landed like a door slamming shut. I hope you finally feel what you took from me. Goodbye, Daniel. Ethan Blake stared at the screen, his pulse pounding. Daniel wasn't his name. The phone felt heavier in his hand as the realization set in. Someone had poured the worst moment of their life into a message meant for someone else, and it had landed with him instead. He sat up slowly, the quiet of the room pressing in around him. The half-packed boxes by the wall. The muted city glow bleeding through the blinds. None of it mattered now. He reread the message not out of curiosity, but because it demanded to be understood. This wasn't just grief. It was years of pressure collapsing into one sentence. Ethan had built his life on keeping distance. From people, from complications, from pain that wasn't his responsibility. He'd learned that getting involved only led to messes you couldn't clean up. But this wasn't a mess. This was a human being unraveling in real time. He hovered over the screen, thumb frozen. Delete it. Or respond. After a long moment he typed, I think this message was meant for someone else. But I've read it. And I'm so sorry for your loss. You shouldn't have to carry this alone. He hesitated, then added one more line. Are you safe right now? The typing bubble appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. And just like that, a single wrong number cracked open a truth that refused to stay buried. The phone vibrated again at 2:13 a.m. A soft sound that felt impossibly loud in the quiet room. Naomi Carter stared at the screen, her chest tight, her breath shallow. She hadn't meant to send anything. Not tonight. Not ever. The words had poured out of her after hours of staring at the ceiling, replaying the same memories she couldn't shut off. The hospital room that smelled like antiseptic, the doctor's careful voice, the moment everything she had been holding onto slipped out of reach. I lost our child because of you. She read the sentence again, her fingers trembling. It looked cruel now, exposed in the glow of the screen. But it was true. Or at least it felt true. Lily Grace had existed inside her for only a short time, but Naomi had already memorized the weight of that hope, the way it had changed how she moved through the world. Every argument with Daniel had felt sharper after that. Every dismissal heavier. He'd told her she was overreacting, that stress was just part of life, that she needed to stop making everything so serious. She had tried. God, she had tried. The message had been meant for him. For Daniel. For the man who hadn't been there when she needed him most. Who had brushed past her grief like it was an inconvenience. The man who still hadn't said Lily's name out loud. Naomi's thumb hovered over the screen. She should delete it. Apologize. Pretend she hadn't cracked open something she couldn't close again. Instead, she locked the phone and turned onto her side, pressing her face into the pillow. The tears came quietly, the way they always did now. Contained, exhausted, like even her grief had learned to keep itself small. The phone buzzed. She froze. Another vibration followed, then another. Her heart began to race as she reached for it, dread pooling in her stomach. Maybe Daniel had replied. Maybe he was angry. Maybe he was finally going to say something that mattered. The name at the top of the screen wasn't Daniel Carter. It was a number she didn't recognize. For a moment, Naomi just stared, confusion cutting through the fog of her sadness. Then she opened the message. I think this message was meant for someone else. But I've read it. And I'm so sorry for your loss. Her breath caught. She sat up slowly, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. You shouldn't have to carry this alone. Are you safe right now? The room felt suddenly too quiet, like the walls were listening. Heat rushed to her face. Embarrassment, panic, a sharp urge to disappear. She had sent her pain into the wrong hands. A stranger had seen her at her most raw. Her first instinct was to shut it down, to retreat back into silence where no one could misunderstand her or ask questions she didn't have answers for. She typed, deleted, typed again. Sorry. That message wasn't meant for you. Please forget you saw it. She stared at the screen, then added one more line before she could stop herself. I shouldn't have sent it. It doesn't change anything. She set the phone face down on the bed, her heart pounding. But somewhere beneath the fear, something else stirred. Small, unwanted, and impossible to ignore. For the first time since Lily Grace was gone, someone had seen her pain. And they hadn't looked away. The phone stayed silent for nearly 10 minutes. Naomi told herself that was a good thing. Silence was safer. Silence meant she could fold back into herself and let the night pass the way it always did. Slow, heavy, unanswered. Then the screen lit up again. I won't forget it, the message read. But I won't misuse it either. Naomi's throat tightened. She sat on the edge of the bed, both hands wrapped around the phone as if it might slip away. I don't know who you are, the stranger continued, but I know what it feels like when grief has nowhere to go. You don't owe me anything. I just didn't want your words to disappear into nothing. Her eyes blurred. She hadn't realized how afraid she was of that, of her pain vanishing unacknowledged, as if Lily Grace had never existed at all. Naomi typed slowly. I shouldn't be talking to you. This is awkward. Sorry. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. You don't have to explain, the reply came. And you don't have to keep talking if you don't want to. I just thought, if someone sent me something like that, I'd hope a human being was on the other end. Not silence. Human being. The phrase settled into her chest, warm and unfamiliar. Daniel had been there physically, technically present, but distant in a way that made her feel invisible. This stranger, this wrong number, felt oddly closer simply because they were trying. Naomi stared at the ceiling, then back at the screen. Her name was Lily Grace, she typed before she could talk herself out of it. The pause that followed felt longer this time. When the reply came, it was gentle. That's a beautiful name. Thank you for trusting me with it. Her breath hitched. She hadn't said Lily's name to anyone in days. Not out loud. Not in writing. Seeing it reflected back at her felt like proof that her daughter had touched the world, even if only briefly. I'm not here to take sides, the stranger added. I don't know what happened between you and him. But loss doesn't need a courtroom. Just needs space to be real. Naomi pressed her lips together, fighting fresh tears. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing against wet pavement. The world was still moving. Somehow, that didn't feel like a betrayal anymore. I don't know why I sent that message, she admitted. I think I just wanted someone to hear me. Another pause. Hear you. The words were simple. No advice. No fixing. Just presence. Naomi leaned back against the headboard, the phone resting against her chest. The ache was still there. Deep, unrelenting. But it had shifted slightly, like a door cracked open in a room she thought was sealed shut. At 2:13 a.m., a stranger had answered. And for the first time in a long while, the silence had been interrupted by something softer than pain. Naomi had avoided saying Lily Grace's name for days, as if speaking it too often might wear it down, make it smaller than it already felt. But once the stranger had said it back to her, something loosened. Lily Grace had been hope wrapped in a promise. A quiet surprise that bloomed slowly, carefully, like Naomi was afraid to breathe too hard around it. She remembered the first night she felt brave enough to imagine the future, the soft yellow walls of a nursery, the way Daniel's hand rested on her stomach as if he could already feel their child listening. Lily had been light. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a presence that made the air feel different. Naomi typed again, the words coming in fragments. She was supposed to be here by now. The reply didn't come right away. When it did, it didn't rush her. Tell me about her if you want. Naomi closed her eyes. Her mind filled with moments that never became memories but still felt real. The heartbeat they heard once, fast and strong. The way she talked to Lily in the shower, whispering about the world outside. The tiny white socks she'd bought and hidden in the back of a drawer, convinced that touching them too often might jinx everything. She wanted to believe that loss was sudden, unavoidable, that it had simply happened to them like bad weather. But grief had a way of replaying every choice, every argument, every silence. Daniel had said they'd be fine. He'd said not to worry so much. He'd said a lot of things instead of listening. Lily Grace never got the chance to take a breath. But she had existed. Naomi knew that with a certainty that cut through everything else. She mattered, Naomi typed. Even if no one else thinks so. Another pause. She mattered because you loved her. That doesn't disappear. Naomi swallowed hard. Her chest ached with the weight of all the love that had nowhere to go now. She rested her palm against her stomach out of habit, the gesture empty and full all at once. For the first time since the loss, Naomi let herself cry without apologizing for it. Not to Daniel. Not to the dark. Not even to herself. Lily Grace was not a mistake. She was not a footnote. She was a small, bright chapter that had ended too soon, but had still changed the story forever. The phone remained warm in Naomi's hand, the stranger still there, still listening. The night didn't feel kind, but it felt honest. And in that honesty, Lily Grace lived, named, remembered and loved, exactly as she deserved to be. By morning the house felt unfamiliar. Daniel moved through it like a guest, quiet, careful, distant. He poured coffee without asking if she wanted any. He checked his phone, then his watch, then the window, as if time itself were waiting on him. Naomi watched from the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. They hadn't talked about Lily Grace since the hospital. Not really, Daniel had said. I'm sorry. Once, the word stiff and rehearsed, then buried himself in logistics, insurance forms, work emails, anything that gave him something to fix. Grief, to him, seemed like a problem that should already be solved. Naomi needed something else. She needed space to ache. To say Lily's name without feeling like she was reopening a wound everyone else wanted sealed. You didn't sleep, Daniel said finally, not looking at her. Neither did you, she thought. But he'd slept enough to forget the way she cried into the pillow beside him. I was up, she said. He nodded, as if that answered something important. I have a meeting at 9. Course you do. The silence stretched. Naomi felt it pressing against her ribs, the way it had for weeks now. Every unspoken thought seemed to stack on top of the last, heavier each time. She would have liked mornings, Naomi said softly, surprising herself. Daniel froze for half a second. Then he sighed, rubbing his face. Naomi, please. Please what? Don't remind me. Don't slow me down. Don't feel. She was our child, Naomi said, her voice steadier than she felt. Why does it sound like I'm the only one who remembers that? Daniel finally looked at her, frustration flickering across his face. I remember. Talking about it all the time doesn't change what happened. The words landed harder than he seemed to expect. Naomi felt something inside her crack, thin and sharp. I'm not trying to change it, she said. I'm trying to survive it. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was a distance in his eyes now, the kind that came from being overwhelmed and choosing withdrawal over vulnerability. I don't know how to help you, he said quietly. Naomi nodded, tears threatening but unshed. That's the problem, she whispered. When Daniel left, the door clicking shut behind him, the house fell into a silence that felt deliberate. Ozen. Naomi sat alone, the echo of Lily Grace's name still lingering in the air. The cracks in her marriage hadn't appeared overnight. They'd formed slowly, in missed glances and unfinished conversations. And now, with the one thing that had held them together gone, the fractures were impossible to ignore. The days that followed pressed down on Naomi like a constant, invisible weight. Daniel spoke less. When he did, his words stayed on the surface. Deadlines, errands, things that could be checked off and completed. Naomi answered when necessary, saving her energy for getting through each hour without unraveling. They moved around each other carefully, like two people afraid that the wrong step might cause everything to collapse. At night, the silence grew heavier. Naomi lay awake listening to Daniel's breathing, steady and detached, as if sleep had granted him an escape she wasn't allowed to enter. Her mind replayed moments she wished she'd said something different, pushed harder, insisted more, spoken sooner. Grief had a cruel way of rewriting the past, assigning blame where there was already enough pain. Sometimes, without meaning to, her thoughts drifted toward him. If you had listened. If you hadn't dismissed my fears. If you'd been there instead of somewhere else. The thoughts frightened her. She didn't want to turn Lily Grace into a weapon between them. But resentment crept in quietly, feeding on every unanswered question and every moment Daniel chose distance over connection. Daniel, for his part, felt the house closing in on him. Naomi's quiet hurt unnerved him more than tears would have. He wanted to fix things, but every attempt felt wrong. When he looked at her, he saw his own failure reflected back, every promise he hadn't been able to keep. So he worked later, took longer drives home, told himself he was giving her space. What he didn't see was how alone that space made her feel. Naomi stopped bringing up Lily Grace. Not because the pain had lessened, but because she was tired of watching Daniel flinch every time her name surfaced. The grief settled deeper, turning inward, growing heavier without an outlet. One evening, Daniel came home to find Naomi sitting on the floor of the bedroom, an open drawer beside her. Inside were the tiny white socks she'd bought months ago. He froze in the doorway, unsure whether to enter or retreat. She looked up at him, her eyes red but dry. "I didn't want to forget her," she said. "But I don't know how to remember her alone." Daniel swallowed, guilt tightening his chest. He wanted to reach for her, to say something that would make the ache disappear. Instead, the words tangled inside him, unspoken and useless. "I'm tired," he said finally. "Can we talk about this later?" The disappointment on Naomi's face was quiet but unmistakable. Later never came. And with every word left unsaid, the distance between them grew, heavy with stress, isolation, and the kind of blame that doesn't shout, but slowly erodes everything it touches. Naomi stared at her phone, the glow of the screen reflecting the tight knot in her chest. The wrong number text had started as a mistake, an accident, and yet it had done what Daniel never could, forced her to speak the words she'd buried for weeks. To name what had happened, to name the person responsible. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed to delete the message, to retreat into silence like she always had. But the stranger's calm words echoed in her mind, a lifeline she hadn't realized she needed. "It can change everything. Only if you're willing to fight." Naomi took a deep breath and began to type, her fingers shaking. She wrote about Lily Grace, about the hope she had carried, about the moments she'd imagined that would never come. And then she wrote about Daniel. Not just his absence, but the pattern of dismissals, the arguments that escalated too quickly, the nights she had lain awake wondering if he even understood the weight of what she felt. It was all there, the truth she had avoided even from herself, the fear that had shadowed her every day of the pregnancy, the crushing pressure to be perfect, to keep things together, to never make him angry. Every argument, every silence, every moment of emotional neglect, the mosaic of grief and guilt that had led to Lily Grace's death. She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The reply came almost immediately. "Thank you for telling me. I can't imagine the pain you're carrying, but you're not alone anymore." Naomi blinked, surprised by the warmth in the words. They weren't judgmental. They didn't deflect blame. They simply acknowledged her pain. And in that acknowledgement, Naomi felt the tiniest crack in the wall she'd built around herself. For the first time, she allowed herself to say everything aloud, if only to the screen. She described how she had tried to protect Lily Grace, how she had begged Daniel to slow down, to listen, to hold her through the uncertainty instead of turning away. She admitted her anger, her grief, and the guilt that had been her constant companion since that night. She wrote the words she had never dared say. It was not just the accident. It was the neglect, the dismissal, the distance that killed her too. And when she pressed send, Naomi felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks. Relief, fragile and tentative, like a candle flickering against the dark. The weight of unspoken words had lifted, even if only slightly. For the first time since losing Lily Grace, Naomi realized that truth could be a kind of freedom. And maybe, just maybe, acknowledging it aloud was the first step toward reclaiming herself, and demanding the accountability she had been avoiding for far too long. Daniel's phone vibrated on the kitchen counter, a small, insistent rhythm that had never felt so loud. He picked it up, expecting a work email or a routine notification. Instead, the message preview hit him like ice water. "I lost our child because of you." His stomach dropped. He froze, staring at the screen. The words were unmistakably Naomi's. Raw, sharp, impossible to misread. And yet, the number. It wasn't his. Panic rose in his chest, mingling with disbelief. How many nights had passed in silence? How many mornings had begun with avoidance and empty apologies? And now this. She had sent it to someone else. Someone outside. Someone who had no right to witness her grief. And yet, he couldn't look away. He scrolled through the rest of the message, each word stabbing at the part of him he had tried so hard to protect. His ego, his pride, the illusion that he was doing enough. He read about her fear, the arguments that escalated too quickly, the nights she had felt unsafe in her own home. He read about the weight of isolation, the subtle dismissals, the moments he had failed to notice, or worse, failed to care. Shame crushed him. Guilt rolled over him like a wave he hadn't expected, leaving him gasping for air. He had thought grief was something to manage quietly, something to endure. He had thought apologies and explanations could erase the distance. He had been wrong. He picked up the phone and called Naomi immediately, the trembling in his hands betraying the calm he tried to summon. She answered on the second ring, her voice cautious, still steeped in exhaustion and wary protection. "Naomi," he said, his voice breaking despite his effort to stay steady. I saw your message." There was silence on the line, heavy and tense. Then she spoke, each word measured, guarded. "It wasn't meant for you." "I know," he admitted. "But I read it anyway. I need to say something. I need to hear you. All of it. I've been blind, and I can't pretend I didn't see it." Naomi's breath caught, a subtle quiver that told him she had been holding back for weeks, months even, waiting for a moment that might never come. "Daniel, I don't know if I can say it all. I've carried so much." "Then let me listen," he said softly, the words almost a plea. "Let me face what I ignored. I don't want to fail you again. I need to understand what I did or didn't do that brought us here." Her silence stretched, fragile yet deliberate. Finally, she spoke, recounting the emotional distance, the neglect, the subtle dismissals that had compounded her fear. She spoke of Lily Grace, of the hope and loss intertwined in every heartbeat she had carried, and of the exhaustion of carrying grief alone. Daniel didn't interrupt. He let each confession land, each accusation pierce him, as if absorbing it could undo the past. He felt every sharp edge of her words, every fracture in their marriage, every ounce of the pain he had contributed to. When she paused, drained, he whispered, "I'm here. Hear you. See you. I will carry this with you." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't absolution. It was acknowledgement. And in that moment, the reckoning had begun. Daniel finally understood that some truths could no longer be hidden, and some actions could no longer be avoided. The weight of what had been unsaid and what had been ignored was finally real, and he could no longer step away. Naomi sat on the edge of the bed, the soft glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the room. Her hands rested on the empty space beside her, where Lily Grace's small blanket had once lain. For weeks, the baby's name had been a whispered ghost in her mind, never spoken aloud, too heavy, too painful. Tonight she could no longer avoid it. She breathed in slowly, letting the silence hold her, and then she whispered, barely more than a breath, "Lily Grace." The name trembled in the air, fragile and raw, but it was hers to say. Daniel, standing across the room, froze at the sound. It was the first time he had heard her say it aloud. The syllables carried more than grief. They carried love, loss, and the aching weight of what had been stolen. He took a tentative step forward, unsure if he belonged in the space she had carved out for her sorrow. I keep thinking if I say it, it'll make it real, Naomi admitted, her voice wavering. And maybe that's terrifying because it hurts too much. But not saying it. Not saying her name feels like she never existed at all. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to reach out to take her hand, but the fear of overstepping, of breaking the delicate trust she had begun to extend, kept him still. Instead he spoke softly. She did exist, Naomi. She still does in every memory, every heartbeat you carry with you. Naomi's eyes glistened with unshed tears. She let herself breathe through the grief, letting the weight of it settle rather than fight it. I keep forgetting sometimes, she was real. She was ours, if only for a moment. I know, Daniel whispered, his voice cracking. And I failed to see it. I failed to honor her with my presence, with my care. But I want to now. I want to say her name with you, to remember her, not just as a loss, but as the little person she was. Naomi's fingers brushed against the blanket, and she smiled faintly through the tears. Lily Grace, she repeated, this time stronger, louder, as if speaking it aloud gave her a small piece of control back. She was soft and warm, and she deserved more than silence. I hear you, Daniel said, taking a careful step closer. And I will never forget her. Never let her memory fade into the quiet we let grow between us. The room was still, filled only with the weight of acknowledgement, the sound of their breaths mingling with the presence of absence. Naomi felt a shift inside her, a small relief that she could honor Lily Grace openly, without fear or shame. Saying her name had not brought her back, but it had allowed her grief to live, to breathe, and to be recognized. Daniel knelt beside her, finally bridging the distance, and whispered her name with her. Lily Grace. Together they let the loss exist, fully and completely, not as a secret to be buried, but as a life that had mattered. The words lingered in the air, heavy but sacred, marking the beginning of remembrance, acknowledgement, and slowly the fragile first steps toward healing. The house felt different the next morning, not brighter, not lighter, but quieter in a way that carried space for something new. Naomi walked through the rooms, her steps measured, feeling the weight she had carried for months shifting, settling into a shape that didn't crush her entirely. The grief was still there, sharp, honest, but it no longer had to dominate every breath. She paused by the nursery, the sunlight catching dust motes in the air, the pale walls holding the faint imprint of a life that had been. She placed a hand on the dresser, the motion deliberate, grounding herself. Saying Lily Grace's name aloud the night before had been the first step. Now, she could let herself move forward, carrying the memory instead of letting it suffocate her. Daniel entered behind her quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile peace she had built. He carried no apologies today, only presence. Naomi glanced at him, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't flinch. The tension between them had softened, not erased, but softened enough to breathe. I thought I'd never get here, she said softly, voice steady but layered with emotion. I thought I'd be trapped forever in the silence and the anger. But I'm not. You're not alone anymore, Daniel replied, and there was no defensiveness in his voice, only honesty. And I'm not just going to watch from the sidelines. I need to learn how to do better, how to be present, for us and for her memory. Naomi exhaled, letting the tension leave her shoulders. The months of holding everything in, of blaming herself, of pretending she could survive in isolation, it had been exhausting, nearly unbearable. But now she could see the first threads of a different pattern, one where grief was acknowledged and not hoarded, where responsibility was shared, and where she could reclaim her agency. She picked up a notebook from the nightstand, flipping it open to the first blank page. For the first time, she felt the courage to write, to pour out the memories, the emotions, the love for a child who had existed only briefly but profoundly. Writing wasn't about forgetting. It was about shaping the grief into something she could carry without it crushing her. Daniel watched, silently supportive as she wrote, respecting the boundary she had reclaimed for herself. He realized that healing wasn't a grand gesture. It was in the quiet moments, the acknowledgement of pain, the commitment to act differently, the choice to face life fully despite loss. When Naomi finally closed the notebook, she felt a small, almost imperceptible relief, a sense that she was allowed to live again without guilt choking every heartbeat. Lily Grace's memory was safe, honored, and alive in ways that no silence or avoidance could erase. Daniel reached out, and Naomi accepted his hand, not as an obligation but as a bridge between them, a shared commitment to presence, accountability, and compassion. They didn't speak. Words were unnecessary. The silence now was different. Healing, reflective, filled with possibility. Outside, the first sounds of morning life filtered through the windows. Inside, Naomi felt the stirrings of a life no longer defined by loss alone. She had faced the pain, said the name, honored the grief, and in doing so, she had reclaimed herself. And that, finally, felt like a beginning.